Hello, my name is Andrew Courier, and I will be discussing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 2 and how faith-based solutions to hunger can help solve the issue on a smaller scale level than larger ones. First off, we need to consider what United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 2 is. Goal 2 is zero hunger. Sustainability is defined as being maintainable or almost renewable. Specifically, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals intends to have all of its projects met by 2030. The goals generally mean to create a global society that has reached sustainability by that year. Hunger, at least in pertinence to the Sustainable Development Goal, means lack of food in a region, usually from either not growing it or having a generally impoverished country, or being in a state of food insecurity. Food insecurity is different from hunger in that it implies that there is food in an area. It is just not easily accessible by the population in that area. Most most underdeveloped countries have a issue with hunger, whereas larger countries have an issue with food insecurity. Poorer populations tend to also be more susceptible to the latter. Next, let's go over some global solutions to this problem as a whole. Our first solution is the Global Agriculture and Food Security Program, which is backed by the World Bank. This program aims to provide loans to poorer nations. Typically, these loans come in the form of not only money, but equipment and seeds to begin farming their own food. This is generally a good thing as it can help societies aren't that are both not very productive in food output as well as lacking in their own food security, a way to build up their own food resources. These programs, however, have come under a bit of criticism. First off, it's not uncommon for these loans to be a bit manipulative and will tend to be hard for the target countries to pay off. Furthermore, these loans often will result in countries only farming one specific food. While this is good on some level, so that they don't have to waste time and resources marketing different products to different countries, this does severely limit their ability to sell food on a wider scale. This also means that if, for example, that population needs more than that one food, they're completely reliant on other nations' trade in order to provide for their own food needs. This does not lead to sustainability in these societies. In fact, to the contrary, they oftentimes are more reliant on other nations providing them aid in order to solve food issues. Generally, this program can railroad economies and are not sustainable solutions for their respective countries. They only serve to provide a bit of a short term solution disguised as a long term one. Furthermore, they aren't much of a help in larger countries. The United States, for example, is not a recipient of the Agriculture and Food Security Program. Yet we still have issues with hunger, so we're going to need something a bit smaller scale in order to solve our issue. This is where we get into local solutions. Generally, though, we also have bigger local issues. Food insecurity in the United States as a whole it has slowly dipped over time up until the pandemic, where it has substantially grown past its initial peaks around the 2010 era. Very low food security as well is also growing over time. This lower bar represents people who are generally on the verge of starving, whereas food insecurity as a whole means people that are either lacking the ability to consistently get good food or are otherwise reliant on food safety nets. The biggest issue in the United States is that we have enough food. In one year alone, we raced approximately $161 billion worth of food, whereas by feeding Tampa Bay's own metrics, we usually will only need about $33.1 billion more worth of food each year in order to solve hunger completely in the United States. So, on this level, we need some local solutions. So, for example, distribution centers. Feeding Tampa Bay is a good example of one that has been relatively successful in our region. It serves as a food bank. People that go to Feeding Tampa Bay can get food for cheap or completely free, and they are generally just a beacon for people that are lacking security. They do have a major weakness, though, and it's the same weakness that was provided by the World Bank solution, being that this is a band aid to a larger problem. Food banks can provide food to people on the short term, but they cannot A, solve long term food insecurity, or B, be a consistently reliable factor for food. Religion also provides a few solutions. For example, almsgiving is a culture that is in multiple different religions, wherein people will often donate money to their local place of worship. This money is then distributed to worshippers or those generally in need, and is oftentimes spent on food or assisting with food insecurity issues. However, this still suffers from the same issue as feeding Tampa Bay, if not more so, because sometimes these donations come purely in the form of money and and are returned as money, or further, are returned as non-food items. We'll get into in a little bit how non-food items are necessary in order to solve issues of food insecurity. However, we need both food support and some other items in order to solve food insecurity as a whole for someone. Generally, religion, however, is a good starting point for solving food insecurity. A lot of religious cultures will idolize the idea of giving away resources to those who need it more than yourself. This is generally just considered virtuous. So, as I mentioned, we need more than just food or just resources in order to have a real solution. Generally, in order to get someone out of food insecurity, we're going to need, of course, short-term food assistance. Something like feeding Tampa Bay is just a piece in the larger puzzle. Furthermore, we need something in the form of poverty assistance. This includes clothing, we need shelter or possibly a home location. See, one of the best solutions to food insecurity is stable employment and shelter. This will mean that people that are struggling with poverty can slowly work their way out of it on their own rather than completely relying on a donating body. A home location is also important as most jobs will require some sort of address to be input in order to both receive pay or to be hired in the first place. This is a major barrier to a lot of people in poverty, since if you're homeless, you are effectively need to buy a home before you can get out of poverty, but you also need to get out of poverty in order to have a home for the most part. Job assistance as a whole also includes training for skills that might be necessary to get a job that will help support someone get out of poverty. Lastly is something like community support and outreach for those who need it. This can include things like making sure that people are presentable for job interviews, help with transportation and city bus passes, etc. The closest thing we have to this, in Tampa Bay at least, is something called the Faith Cafe. This cafe aims to provide a more dignified form of food assistance. They work almost like a restaurant and serve those who come to it. They also provide monthly clothing assistance and weekly on site showers. As well, they have a system in which they can redirect you to another group if you have a need that they can't fulfill. Generally, Faith Cafe is almost what I suggest we need in order to solve the issue of food insecurity. What they're merely missing is having on site job training and support, and some means of having transportation to those who desperately need it. They do, however, redirect you to groups that could possibly provide this. As I mentioned earlier, Feeding Tampa Bay can still exist as a band aid solution, so Faith Cafe works as a part of a bigger system. Generally, though, in order to solve hunger as a whole, we would need religious groups like Faith Cafe to do even more for the populace and on a much wider scale than just the small part of Tampa Bay it can cover. In conclusion, religious groups can be quite a boon to solving hunger. However, we need to do a bit more in order to fully solve the problem. We have the right ideas, though. These are the works cited in this presentation.